So, do you want me to preach a little louder than usual since you lost an hour of sleep? Yeah. Jerry is saying, please no. Beautiful day today. We were in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 in the Bible study this morning. It says that God has made everything beautiful in his time. Well, it's time for us to open up to Leviticus chapter 26. Leviticus chapter 26. I made this promise probably about a month ago that I would say something out of Leviticus because I know that when you're doing the read through a Bible in a year, once you get to Leviticus, and I'm late, I should have done it a couple of weeks ago or a month ago. I think a lot of people are through Numbers now. If you haven't slowed down too much, if you slow down, that's okay. Just keep on going. Remember, Christianity is a marathon, not a sprint. So just stay on track. So Leviticus chapter 26 is a chapter that summarizes the blessing and the curse. And when we read the Old Testament, there's a couple of verses that we can refer to in the New Testament that help us understand what we can do with the Old Testament. There's a verse in Romans chapter 15 that says that these things happen as examples and we can learn from them. And there's a few verses like that. And one of the reasons why it's important to keep that in mind is because much of the specifics and the details of the Old Testament have been nailed to the cross, and Jesus brought in a new covenant. And so we don't read all this and take all of it literal. There's plenty of literal things to keep in mind, but we read them mainly appreciating the spiritual application that they bring to our lives. And Leviticus chapter 26 talks about the blessing and the curse. Both of those carry into the new covenant, but more on an eternal level. With the children of Israel, God would actually give them blessing that was very specific on a physical level. He still does that. He still does that. But life ebbs and flows. Sometimes there's more feasting than famine. Sometimes there's more famine than feasting. And that's just the way it goes. And he promises people that if you guys do what I says, you're going to be living the good life. Well, they never did what he says. So they never got that, you know what I mean? But we still see that promise to this day for us eternally. So let's go ahead and read. Leviticus chapter 26, beginning in verse 3. It says, if, let's stop right there. That's an important word. It's a small word, but it's like Napoleon. Small in stature doesn't mean small in presence, right? Small word, but it has a big meaning, a big punch. If, maybe that's how it should be read. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them. I hear an echo of the Son of God saying, not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that does the will of my Father. There's doing that needs to be happening. Verse 4, he says, then. So there's that if and then statement. So verse 3 says, if. Verse 4 says, then I will give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit, and your threshing shall reach unto the vintage, and the vintage shall reach unto the sowing time, and you shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land safely. And that right there, that dwell in the land safely, it's got a nice ring to it, don't you think? We all want to be safe. Man, we all want to feel safe. You know what's crazy about we crazy people? Even if you know you're safe, that doesn't mean you feel safe. There's Something to be said about that. If you don't feel safe, man, spend more time in the good work. Because there's safety in here. There's beauty and safety. But remember now, he's telling them, if you do what I says, then you're going to be able to obtain this land and keep this land, and it's going to be safe in that land. And he explains some of that in detail. Verse 6, Leviticus 26 and verse 6. And I will give peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. And I will rid evil beasts out of the land. That one kind of makes me laugh. Like he's going to control wildlife for their sake. No, I don't. I would think that would include rats and mice. I don't know for sure. Neither shall the sword go through your land, and you shall chase your enemies. And they shall fall before you by the sword. And 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. For I will have respect unto you, and make you fruitful, and multiply you, and establish my covenant with you. Okay? Now that is the point of the text that I want to develop and really make real for you today, is this idea of the safety in the land and the ridding of the enemy. And it's a subject that applies to every single one of us. It applies to us collectively as a church. It applies to us individually in our personal lives as well. But lean in with me into verse 6 for a moment here. Verse 6, he says, and I will give peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. This is one of those ideas that I just have this crazy notion that some of you struggle with sleep sometimes. I got a lot of nods. Got a lot of nods. It was like a collective, like wave. Like at the football game, they got the wave. It's like a wave of nods. Yeah, I got trouble sleeping sometimes. Now, there's a lot of things that give us trouble when it comes to sleep, and we got a promise here. And I'm not gonna lie. There's times when we don't have life going the way we want going, we complain. We pour out our complaints to God, and we kind of says to Him, "Yo, you said it's gonna have peace. You said it's gonna have peaceful sleep, and I'm not sleeping so well these days." So I want to talk to you about that kind of thing right now, because there is the physical life. Now, of course, keep in mind the importance of the spiritual, because it doesn't matter how bad your back is aching, one day it will be restored, but you gotta wait. That's the hard part for us. But on a spiritual level, you must be able to transcend. That word is used in the Bible class this morning. The idea of transcend. You have to be able to learn how to transcend above this life, no matter what you're going through right now. And the only way to do that is by God and faith. It is of the utmost importance, and Christians need to do this and need to learn how to do it, because the world is depending on you to be at peace. The world is depending upon you to tell them and to deliver to them amazing news of peace. So if you can't learn how to transcend this life and tell people about the goodness of the life that is to come, who will tell them? Who is going to be walking around with a smile and be like, you looked at yourself last night, actually was horrible. Actually, my back was aching, and literally my back was aching this last week. I slipped a disc. I'm not joking. That actually happened. I didn't do that just so I could tell you in this sermon, by the way. It was a total accident. I was like, I need to find some way to give a good example in my sermon today. No, I actually busted up my back, and my kids had a good time making fun of the way I was walking. And I says, boy, man, I tell you what, when I'm 100 years old, this is how I'll be walking. But here is one of the major problems and issues that we have that interferes with not just our physical sleep, our physical rest, but our spiritual capacity to understand and to know and to believe. It's the enemy. It's our enemies. Verse 7, it says, "And you shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. And 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword." Let's talk about the enemy for a second, and the reason why you got trouble sleeping, and the reason why it's actually not such a bad thing that you got trouble sleeping. I don't think the enemy sleeps. It's kind of like rust. You know what they say about rust? Rust never sleeps. It's just always contaminating, always spreading. I don't think the enemy sleeps. And if you go to the book of Revelation and you take a look at the way it describes the little boys that obey Satan, the dark one, he's got quite a few hanging around. And they're poking, messing with your sleep. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but we want to understand this enemy. So I'm going to take you now to 1 Peter chapter 5. Let's understand this enemy. Just a little bit. Just to give you something to chew on, something to think about for a little while here. 1 Peter chapter 5. The whole book is basically dedicated to the comfort and the encouragement of the disciple of Christ who is going through struggles. And just like I asked a while ago if you got trouble sleeping, and I got that wave of nods. If I were to ask you if you've been struggling, if you've got a struggle going on in your life, in your walk with Jesus, the Son of God, and sometimes your faith even being put to the test, which is a thing. It's a very present thing. It's something that happens quite regularly, and it's something that the Scriptures deals with. But this book is about that, and Peter, makes this statement in verses 7 and 8. Let's read verse 6 with it, just to get a little bit more of the rich context. So 1 Peter chapter 5, beginning of verse 6, it says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time." Let's stop right there. Doesn't that fit what we've been talking about so well? You got to wait for God's exaltation. We want our exaltation now. We want our relief now. You know that God doesn't obey you like your phone does. God doesn't obey you like your microwave does. You can't get now from God all the time. Sometimes you get a lot of the time wait, or not now, or you just do what I says. But God will exalt in due time as he sees fit. Verse 7 therefore gives an encouraging remark. Casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. There's a transition of care happening here. You guys see the transition? The transport, there's a transport. The transitioning my cares onto somebody else. Sounds like the cross. Sounds like the beating that was afflicted upon somebody. Sounds like Isaiah chapter 53 when it says, "By his stripes we are healed." This is all, remember now, spiritual. This is all very important. But then we have this care, because he's talking to Christians here who have these cares, who have these things that are happening, these struggles that are happening, and we're actually given biblical authority to transfer those cares onto somebody else. And so I therefore encourage you to know and understand the importance of actually doing this. The transfer of care, the transfer of worries, and worries is a better word, honestly. Worries, frustrations, issues. The transfer does not bring about a miraculous poof, it disappears. It doesn't do that. That's why being human is hard. And that's why so many people's faith wavers. The idea of wavering. If God doesn't do this, remember now, when we were back in Leviticus and it says, if you keep my commands, I will do this for you. Now, that's God. God's the one calling the shots around here. But then I say, God, if you do this for me, then I'll obey you. Now, that is backwards. You see what I'm saying? Like, we do not make the conditions. God, I tell you what, once my income hits, boom, then I'll say, oh, okay, now I'm cool. Or once you remove this pain from my life, then I will do something for you. God says, you learn how to transfer your worries onto somebody else, and what that will do is it will give you a certain type of strength that you didn't even know that you had. God sees something in you that you don't see in yourself. You know that He made you, and He knew you before you even came forth from the womb, and He knew what you were capable of doing. And if you're going through pain, then keep on moving, because you got something ahead that He needs you to be prepared for. And preparation is what I'm talking about, because you need to be prepared to face an enemy. Remember now, there is an enemy, and the enemy be poking at you, and you have to learn how to conquer that enemy. And you don't learn how to conquer that enemy by relaxation. That doesn't work. And so that's why I was talking about sleep. That's why sleep is such an important thing, because if you're losing sleep, good. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. Now, we think it's a bad thing because why? Because it makes me tired. It makes me tired. It makes me groggy. It makes me worry even more. And what are the things that we stay up thinking about? What do we think about when we're sleeping, or when we're having trouble sleeping, rather? We think about the stuff. The stuff. What stuff? The backache. The loved one. The upcoming conversation, interview. The upcoming doctor's appointment. The wondering what's around the corner. All kinds of stuff. You guys know what I'm talking about. Keeps us up at night. I was thinking about this recently. Anybody here ever heard about the Civil War back in the 1860s? A man by the name of Abraham Lincoln, 7 years ago, will have a new birth of freedom. I want to ask you a question. How much sleep do you think he got in that 5 years of war? How much sleep do you think he got? I mean, good sleep. Now, he was worked into exhaustion. I guarantee you that. Zero good sleep. You realize you're in a war right now? And I'm not talking about what America's going on. Now, you are an American, that's all fine and good, but you're a citizen of a kingdom, an eternal kingdom. And you got a king. And he stands or sits at the right hand of God. Sometimes I think he'd be standing a lot right now. Don't forget, you guys know about that? That every single time Jesus is mentioned at the right hand of God, he's sitting. Do you know that? With one exception. Do you know that exception? When Stephen was stoned to death. In Acts chapter 7, at the end, when they pick up the stones to stone him for preaching the gospel, by the way. You think your life is tough. Don't want to minimize anybody's toughness of life, but he got stoned to death for preaching the gospel. And as they were getting ready to throw those stones at him, he looks up into the heavens and he sees God, or he sees Jesus, who is God, standing at the right hand of God. You're in a war. And I think one of the things that we can be doing, people like Abraham Lincoln or the generals, General Grant or whoever, General Lee, he was at war too. He was on the wrong side of that war. He wasn't sleeping much either, just like Satan ain't sleeping much. Neither should we. You know what they're thinking about? How they were going to win that war. Go with me to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Put your bookmark in 1 Peter chapter 5, because I haven't gotten to the good part yet there. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. In the King James Bible, there's three words in a verse here that I want to share with you that you've probably heard before. And I don't want it to become one of those numbing verses that you've heard so many times. You think, oh, yeah, I've heard that one before. Think about the depth of this statement that we're about to read. And the context is so rich, but this stands so nicely as its own statement. In fact, you might even have it like framed somewhere, hanging up in your living room. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 17, Paul writes the words, pray without ceasing. Let me tell you right now, as I was thinking about this lesson, and I tell you what, every single sermon that I preach, every single sermon that I write, every single class that I prepare for, God is dragging me through the coals most of the time, like teaching me stuff. And I'm getting so tired of learning. You know what I mean? It's like I'm just like over here, studying this stuff, and I'm like, man, really? I didn't know that, and I'm having to be you know, taught, and I'm having to go through all these things. And I've been thinking to myself, there's this problem that I have had for a long time, and I finally came to this comforting realization, and it was just in this last week preparing for this. And I can tell you this right now. Public speaking is one of those difficult things to do. You know what the joke is from Seinfeld? Seinfeld says one of the number one fears is public speaking, and below that is death. So he said, therefore, if you're at a funeral, you're better off in the casket than in the pulpit. You know? uh, does it get easier to stand up here and yell at you every Sunday? I guess kind of it does. But I lose sleep every single Saturday night. Every single Saturday night, I'm losing sleep. I don't sleep well. And I've been so many times thought to myself, why can't I just reach a point, God, where I can just get a good night's rest? Wouldn't I preach so much better? And it was in the midst of writing this sermon and then realizing I'm not the only one struggling with sleep because I'm the only one stressing over stuff or fretting over stuff. I'm going to go to a verse in a little bit about fretting. We talked about that a week ago. But I started to come to this realization that struggling with sleep is a human thing. If you're a human, you're going to struggle because things keep us aggravated. What's God trying to teach us? Pray without ceasing. Your mind starts to drift off into worried about that. And then it starts to drift over thinking about this or feeling something. But all the while, you could be doing this. God, thank you. God, thank you. Those three words. James said, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith works perseverance. Let perseverance have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, lacking nothing. You know what's going on there? You are lacking sleep, that you may lack nothing. Well, I wish I could just sleep normal and not lack anything, God's trying to teach you something. I have this crazy idea that maybe by making that shift and counting it all joy and realizing, you know what, it's good to be able to, in my mind, be with God, because what a beautiful place to be. David called it the secret of the tabernacle. I love the 27th Psalm because David talks about going to the secret of the tabernacle. And David could not go to the secret of the tabernacle. I want you to know that. He was not of the tribe of Levi. He couldn't put on the ephod and put on the hat and do all the sacrifices and go into the secret of the tabernacle. He could go to the Holy of Holies. Only one man could do that. It was a high priest. He wouldn't be able to do it. In fact, God might even strike him down dead before he could even get there, you see. So how did he enter the secret of the tabernacle? The same way you can enter the secret of the tabernacle. Go behind the veil where the Ark of the Covenant is. But an even more beautiful one, the one where the blood of the Christ was sprinkled. So I think that's a whole nother way to think about prayer without ceasing. My mentor would do this from time to time. I like the simple statements. I call it Solomon logic because there's a couple of the statements in the Proverbs that are just too simple. Like, an unfaithful man will be unfaithful. It's like, well, thank you, Solomon, for that obvious statement. Or a liar will pour out lies. It's like, well, yeah, yeah. But if it's so obvious, why do we see it so much, right? Why do we do it to ourselves so much? But my mentor would make simple statements, and he would just say something like, so this whole pray without ceasing idea, go ahead and try it. Just go ahead and try it. Like, in your mind, stay in prayer. Just stay in prayer. Whew. You're getting ready for war. That's why you're losing sleep. And you're ready for war. There's something to fight. So go back to 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. There's something to fight. Peter, finishing this idea as he is encouraging these Christians, says in 1 Peter 5 and verse 8, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour. Now, this is what you are preparing for. This is what you ought to be doing with your mind and with your thoughts and with your intentions when you are struggling with a lack of sleep or whatever it might be, because this is overarching, applicable in all areas. I mentioned a moment ago the idea of fretting. Fretting is such an interesting concept, and I think it's real important for us to talk about it because we are flesh. You know, have you ever talked to a Christian who has a very profound relationship with God, but they still have a involuntary raising of the heartbeat whenever struggles come? And that's what the struggling with sleep even is. It's the fact we are flesh and we still have involuntary things happening inside of the body. And as a result of that, we could go on through life having a hard time even being present because we might be worried about something. And that's why I use the backache. Because you ever been trying to have a conversation with somebody and your back just hurting while you're talking? You're having a hard time even focusing on what they're saying. But that's the way worries and these things that the enemy is poking at us does. It's what it does to us. It makes it more difficult. So he says here, be sober, be vigilant, because Satan knows how to get you. See, a lion is watching. A lion is perfectly equipped to take down his prey. And he's doing that. And this is the type of war. This is like a symbol of a fight, a symbol of a battle. And we, therefore, must learn how to be sober and vigilant. Because that's exactly what the devil's trying to do, is take us down. So we need to be prepared for war and battle. And what I am proposing to you today is that you convert the struggles into preparation for war, preparation for battle. No more, God, why can't I sleep? But harness your mind and harness your energy into action. But there is one last statement that I want you to take very seriously with me this morning. Very seriously. And the bizarre part about this whole thing, really the fight is really mostly with ourselves. Because God has already guaranteed us that he wins the war. So so what's the problem? Stop and think about. So what's the problem? If you know that God wins, then what are we struggling with? The fight isn't with the enemy because God's already going to slay that enemy. We're fighting ourselves into trusting that God is going to fight the enemy. Because Jesus has the power to conquer the enemy, and there's only one way. The statement that Moses made to the children of Israel when Pharaoh's army was right behind them and the Red Sea was right in front of them, it puts a whole new meaning to a rock and a hard place, a war and a sea, an army and a sea, between an army and a sea. And you remember what Moses said to the people? The Lord will fight for you. So we're fighting ourselves. So I'm going to take you to one last verse to finish up, and it's 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, would you please read with me verses 9 through 11? It says, know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God. Now watch verse 11. And such were some of you. Really cash in on that were. And here's the reason why. Such were some of you. Now, I don't know if Paul, the Apostle Paul, was being polite when he said, such were some of you. Such were all of you. You know what I mean? Such were all of us. And then he says, but you are washed. But you are sanctified. But you are justified in the name of the Lord Jesus and by the Spirit of our God. So this begs the question, and a fight too, because a fight happens every Sunday. You know that? A fight happens every Sunday. A war happens every Sunday. People hear about the message of being baptized for the remission of sins, and people fight doing it. People fight the simple act of doing what God said because they get in their own way. I'm not worthy, or I don't know if, all kinds of stuff. If Jesus hung on the cross to make sure that you could be washed, don't you think he thought you to be worthy? So we got a battle going on. And of course, that battle is happening inwardly for a lot of people because we have the question, are you washed in the blood? And so I'm going to ask you that question right now to really seriously consider that and fight the good fight. Prepare yourself to come and be baptized in the name of Christ, washing away your sins while we stand and see.